Hi guys, this is Lindsey with Lindsey's Craft Studio, and today we are going to be making this macrame feather. So as you can see, this is one that I've pre-made out of some regular yarn. This is something that you could definitely do with just regular macrame thread like I have here, which is actually what I'm going to make today's example out of. Or you could use like this sugar and cream, really thin baby yarn. Or like I said, this feather was actually made out of this big, thick yarn here. So that's what it looks like when you kind of unfold it and fluff it out. And all of those things are things that I'm going to show you how to do today. But first, we have to get set up for this activity. So first thing you want to do is open your package of yarn. If you're using macrame yarn, I'm actually going to go with this color, I think, to begin, because this is going to be my favorite. And each one of these little tiny packages of macrame yarn that you can get from like Michael's for a couple of bucks, these are, I want to say $7.99 or $9.99 each. Comparatively, the big balls of yarn, you can get a ton of feathers from each macrame class out of them, and you are only using one ball at a time. So like if you buy a big ball of yarn, you can make a lot more feathers than this, which is why I usually don't advise that people spend this much money on actual macrame thread to do this activity. It's really not important. You can use whatever yarn or thread you have on hand. It's just going to give you a different product. For example, this stuff comes out fluffier, and this stuff comes out a little bit stringier, featherier, which you can see as we unravel here. So I'm just going to find the end. So if you're walking around the store and you're wondering what to buy, if you kind of unfold the end of whatever you're looking at, it's going to give you a good idea of what it will look like when it is part of a feather. So you can see this is kind of piecey. It stays nice and rigid. It doesn't really flop over. So this is good for making macrame feathers out of. And if we were to do that out of this other thread, you can see if you kind of squish everything apart here, it really gets nice and fluffy, which is also good. So it just depends on which kind of look you're interested in. And this stuff is very similar to the macrame thread. And like I said, you can get a ton of these for like $1. It has very few strands, so you'll have to tie more on to get the same effect, but it's definitely doable. And this is my cat stepping on everything that I'll be using today because he wants his water, which is on my desk during every class, and I didn't refill before this class. I'm sorry, buddy. Don't knock my camera down with your tail. Thank you. All right, so first things first. To make a macrame feather, can't talk today. To make a macrame feather that is about this size, which is a little bit bigger than my hand, you're going to want to start with the center piece first. So you're going to want something that's about this long. I would say that this is about 1 foot in length. So let's say each one of these feathers is about 6 inches. You can always go ahead and cut that center piece a lot longer than what you think you're going to be using, because there is a little bit of trimming that goes into macrame. The other thing you're going to want to do is, depending on whether you're going to be tying this on or if you're going to be threading something through it, if you are going to be attaching this to any kind of wall hanging, you're definitely going to want to make sure that you tie a knot at the top to kind of tell you where to stop your design and to give you a place where, as you're snugging these all up next to one another, you've got a good spot to stop where you're not actually going to wind up pulling feathers off of the other end. So this is going to be the center of our feather. So I'm going to move this guy out of the way so we can work. And what I usually do is I usually tuck it underneath something heavy. So my handy dandy class sign here is going to help us with our endeavor today. You can also tape the center of your feather down to your desk, really whatever you feel like doing, just to keep it nice and stable. So now you're going to kind of picture how wide you want your feather to be. And I'm going to go ahead and say that I want my feather to be about this wide at the top, and then I'm not going to worry about the bottom because we'll be cutting shapes to actually make our feather be the correct shape later on. So for as wide as you want your feather to be, you're going to go ahead and give a cut. And this is actually going to form one side of your feather. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So you're going to need to cut a bunch of these. So what I usually do is I usually take my hands and go back and forth and give myself quite a few strands before I start cutting through. So I'm actually going to do that on my lap for a second so that I get everything done nice and quickly. But all I'm doing is just cutting threads that are a normal length here, like so. Some people do this around their arms to like cut longer threads for things, and that one I've never understood, but I can do it with my fingers just fine. So the exact amount of these that you're going to need for each feather is going to vary pretty substantially. You know, you should be, like I said, you should be able to get a good sized feather out of each one of those little tiny macrame cords. So if you've bought a package and you're making your feathers about the same size as I am, you're only going to get about 3 feathers from your package of 3 differently colored threads. And if you're doing this with yarn, you're going to get a lot more. So we have our feathers here. Just cutting up. I know you can't see my hands, but it's a lot easier to do this closer to my face than it is to hold it onto the camera with the way I've got my camera set up going here. So just make sure if you're doing that back and forth trick that you are getting all the little loopies. So I would say I have maybe 20 or 25, 25-ish threads here, and that's what I'm going to actually start with. So what you're going to do to make your macrame feather is you're going to take one of your threads and you're going to lay it this way with a loop facing to the right. So you'll have your center of your feather facing up. And the next thing you're going to do is you are going to take your next thread and you're going to thread the 2 ends through the little loop that you were leaving available. And before you get to the end here, you're going to actually put your fingers through and pull those 2 ends up. So what we have here is the 2 ends going in 2 different directions, and you have your loops catching so that as we pull tight, we wind up with a nice knot. And as I'm looking at this here, I'm going to go ahead and say that I probably cut my lengths for my feather too long. So what I'm going to do to actually save myself some width here, let's see if I could still do this if I cut these in half. I don't think so. So we're just going to wing it. We'll see how it goes. There's always guesswork with macrame. There's always guesswork anytime you do anything this involved with threads. And once you brush everything out, like once these are untwisted, you will get a lot more mass. So it's not something that you need to worry about right away. If you wind up, it looks a little bit sparse. So for your next row, you're going to go the opposite direction. So we had our first loop, which was underneath, heading to the right last time. Now we're going to have our first loop, which is underneath, heading to the left. So your next little legs here get tucked into that loop and pulled across. And before you pull this through, you need to pull those 2 back strings up so that you can make your square knot. So now you understand why we have that knot at the top of our feather. So you can continue to kind of push up as you finish here. All right. Moving on. So now we're going to go the other way. We have this loop underneath. And we have this loop that's going to go on top, pushing our ends through. and pulling our ends up and pulling in different directions. So as you can see here, this gives this a really nice zigzag effect. The bigger the thread you use, the more pronounced this is going to be in the center. For example, this is really, really visible at the end in this particular feather. It just looks so pretty. So I really like that color contrast there between the fluffiness of the outside and the not so fluffiness of the inside. Just the hardest part of this is remembering to flip-flop. And if you should happen to start pulling this tight and it doesn't really look the way it's supposed to, if you think you've gone the wrong way, if it bothers you, it's just as simple as sliding this all the way down here and kind of pulling this off, and then you'll be able to undo it and redo it. So nice and easy. So we're just going to keep going here. This is the type of thing that does take a little bit of time, but totally worth it once we get going. And it's much easier to do flat than it is to try and hold in your lap. So if you're trying to do this in the air somewhere and it's fighting you, it may not be the best idea to continue holding it up. I would put it down flat somewhere. So the other thing that you are going to need, aside from macrame thread and your scissors, I mean, you don't need it per se. But it is sometimes helpful. You may want some hairspray or spray starch or something, just because stiffening the fibers, like if you're going to hang this up, these tend to be really floppy and they'll kind of fall forward on you. And if that happens, you know, sometimes it doesn't look too good hanging on a wall. So it's definitely a good thing to invest in some sort of stiffening agent if you're using macrame thread. If you're using embroidery thread or something else, if you're using certain types of yarn, like the foofy yarn that I have that is really, really lightweight, it's not going to require a stiffening agent because by itself it kind of stands up on its own. And again, these are all personal preference things. You know, if it doesn't bother you that when you're hanging your feather up, your fibers are kind of going like this instead of staying straight out, you don't really need to worry about that. So it's all personal choice. So this is the end of our roll there where I was unraveling that. You can see the difference between the side that I started to fluff already and the side that I did not. And I'm going to turn this for just a second so you guys can see how well behaved my assistant is sitting on my desk. He is not taking anything and running away with anything today. He is just being such a good little boy, but he's definitely very interested in the feathers. I keep saying the word feather a lot, and he doesn't see feathers, he sees string, which is usually chewable and for playtime in our house, but he seems to know the difference between when I'm talking just to him and when I'm talking and teaching a class. So there we go. Continuing to pull on those knots and make sure everything is nice and secure. So as you can see, we just repeat like this. If my macrame starts to go off of the camera here, just know that I continue until I kind of reach the end of my rope. And in fact, you can stop a little bit short of the end of your string because, like I said, those fibers are going to flop downward, so it's not really a big deal. Just a lot of repetition with this craft. So you can understand now that you're seeing us do this, you know, when you see those tiny macrame keychains and they're like $17, $18, $19, sometimes $25 or $30 depending on what it is, now you understand because it does take so long to do. It's not necessarily complicated, it just takes a very long time. And like, don't get me wrong, there are very complicated macrame knots, but we are not learning any of those today. Oh, I did that backwards. Happens to all of us. So we want these through here and these through here. There we go. So I wound up with a lone little macrame thread, and rather than just tying it onto one side and it being really sad, I'm actually going to just make a couple of knots here, and like maybe I'll use this in another life to attach it to some sort of tapestry. So you're going to want to make some sort of square knot and then perhaps another square knot, just so that you don't accidentally pull your macrame off of the end as we're doing our next step, which is going to be shaping everything. So if you were to kind of pull this down toward the end, you know, you've got pretty much your feather shape, but these edges are not really as neat as they could possibly be. So this is where your stiffening agent would come in handy. So you would spray the bejesus out of this with hairspray. You're going to want to do that probably after you do the brushing. I like to do my cutting first so that I've got like a nice little shape here, and I'm not sure if you can see that whole thing, so I'm actually going to turn it sideways so you can see. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take your scissor and kind of shape your edges. So you can go ahead and like trim everything, get everything nice and neat, you know, change your shape of your feather if you want to. You can make everything shorter. And some people do like a more organic look. So if this doesn't bother you at all, you can go ahead and just start unraveling. So what I usually do is I usually start from the top, and I'll go pretty close to where I began and just start unraveling with my fingers. And this does take a fair bit of time. So if you're easily frustrated, you might want to do this over the course of a couple of moments. And so already we've got a more natural looking feather here. And what you can do to get maximum fluffiness from your macrame thread is the more times you brush through it, the better. So I just use a regular hairbrush, which I didn't happen to grab before I sat down. And now, of course, I'm all wired into everything. But let's see if we can get this to look halfway presentable. So you can see the difference between the left side and the right side. And you can see that there are still kind of small sections that I didn't untwist. This macrame thread, you really do have to untwist every single strand, which is a lot easier sometimes with a fork or a pair of tweezers. As long as you've got this on a surface that you can't easily scratch, you can pretty much just brush the heck out of it until it's as fluffy as you want it to be. So we're continuing to unravel and fluff. And like I said, for a while it's going to look like nothing. So the difference between a feather and a leaf as we're doing our unraveling here. The feather-shaped macrames tend to be long and skinny, and the leaves tend to be a little bit wider. If you were to make a very big feather or a very big leaf and kind of glue it to some sort of stiffened backing, I have seen people cut those into like the giant elephant ear frond shapes with those little cutouts in the edges of the leaf. I've seen people leave some space between and pretend that they've made a fern. If you were to make these out of like orange and copper tones, if you were to use like natural tones, maybe some browns and some golden colors, You could very easily make a fall wall hanging out of this with just a bunch of different sized and shaped leaves. And really all that you have to do is make sure that when you're tying on your pieces, you're leaving them long enough so that you can cut them shorter and make the shape that you want. That's really the only trick here. So starting to shape up. Just starting. And you can see the difference one side versus the other, that I'm getting that really feathery effect. And honestly, I do find this way easier to do with yarn. That is one of the other reasons that I don't really care for the actual macrame thread. I find it difficult to work with. I think it has something to do with the amount of dye that they put into it. It's very stiff. It's not soft. It doesn't flow in the breeze. And it's really good if you're making knot work bracelets and things like that. But for what humanity has started using it for, which is decorative items that are made out of macrame, whether it's a keychain or, like I said, bracelets and things, I really just feel that it's very scratchy. For me personally, I don't care for it. But it does come in the typical variety of colors. It's always very earth toned. It's very rare that I see neon macrame thread. So if you're looking for that very 70s macrame vibe, your macrame thread may be the best way to go for you. It's just about finding the right materials for the project that you're doing, which is an individual journey. So as we get to the end here, I'm going to show you what trimming just a little bit more looks like. So I'll be trimming just this one side to make a huge difference and kind of show you the difference before and after. So you can see sometimes unraveling just this little bit and then trimming a little bit more, you get a much clearer shape of what you're looking for. And oftentimes people will take like iron-on adhesive and things and they'll stick that to the back of their macrame leaf. You just want to make sure that you're trimming your shape for your backing a lot smaller than the actual leaf that you are trying to make, because if you leave it bigger, you're going to see it from the front and you don't really get the illusion that it's just a solid piece of woven tapestry if you can see the backing from the front. So if I were making a piece of backing for this particular leaf, I would be cutting in my shape quite a bit further than what I'm actually working with, so that I would have these fringy pieces kind of hanging off the side. And that's what keeps that shape looking organic. So I have seen these in stores, and they are usually hanging from some sort of tapestry. Now, what that means is, you know, if you're the type of person who wants to learn to make a dream catcher or a moon-shaped dream catcher, anything like that, these would be the perfect thing to hang off of the bottom of it. You could also just get a very simple piece of wood, like some sort of driftwood, anything like that, and you could use that instead. And a bunch of these kind of hanging off of the bottom of it really looks visually striking. So now we can see where we need to trim a little bit more with our thread here. So I just very carefully start hacking away just to get a little bit neater of a shape. Just a little bit. And I think this is really the only spot that I need to redo, is this corner edge. Now, if you've got sharper scissors than I do, or if you've been starching this as you go along, it's always easier to cut into than what I just attempted to do. So as far as this feather goes, picture this on both sides. So you can see how sparse it starts off because we didn't unravel on this side. And then once you've started to unravel, you're going to go ahead and, you know, see a little bit more fluffiness. And that is always the type of feather that we strive for. And then you are going to go ahead and continue unraveling. I actually am going to very quickly go and grab a brush just so I can show you that finished product. So for about a second or two here, you're not going to see or hear me, and then I will be back. So hang on, hang tight. All right, I am back here, guys. Thank you for holding tight. So first things first, I've got my regular like brushy brush. And as you can hear, sometimes it gets snagged on things in the inside there. And I've seen people do this with animal hair brushes. And I don't actually own one of those. Like, I have a cat, but I don't have a cat hair brush per se. Some people swear that the wire ones do a better job. I don't mind this plastic one so much. And generally, the more you brush and the more repeated times you go through, the more you get that kind of wispy effect for your feather here. All right, so that's one side done. So now we are going to start unraveling our other side. So as you can tell, something like this really just takes time. There's no way to really speed up this process. It does take a long time to unravel each of these little tiny things unless you're using the other type of yarn, which is much quicker. And, you know, the amount of feathers that you make in a day is only limited to your imagination. This is the type of thing that's really zen and really easy to do if you're doing it in front of like a television program or anything like that. And as you can see, my cat finds it a very zen process. He's actually watching every single move that I make because he's a very good boy and he helps me with all of my classes. So he's definitely really cute and he watches my every word. His name is Oliver. He's actually 3 years old, and I got him 3 Decembers ago, and we're kind of bonded because when I first got him, he had a little broken leg. And as you can see, he's since healed up completely fine. He's very active, but he's definitely my boy, and anything that I do, he's very interested in. So when I work, he's usually somewhere on my desk, whether he's on camera or not. And, you know, he's very soothing presence, and he's a big hit with the kids. Like anytime I teach anything with teenagers or anyone that's younger, they are always super excited to see him. And I actually had one girl one time go running into her house to pick up and show me her cat during one of my classes because she was so excited that there was another cat hanging out. And I've had kids go running away to show me their geckos and their fish, and you know, it's a community of pet people that seem to be attracted to seeing him during class. So just a little bit of Oliver time for all of you. As I continue untwisting here. We are almost there. So if you have stuck with me this far and you're interested in seeing the finished product, first of all, thank you very much for crafting along. If you are a part of my usual audience and you're wondering why this was not a Facebook Live, Facebook actually has changed its recording setup. They had a different setup a couple of weeks ago, and I planned all of these live classes, and then I found out 2 days ago that they no longer support my streaming software. So I'm trying my best to work around that because the show must go on. I don't want to cancel anything or break anyone's heart, and I want everyone to be able to do these crafts on the day that they're planning to do them, because there's nothing more disappointing than sitting home with all of these supplies and not being able to craft, which is what happened to me a couple of days ago, and it broke my heart to not be able to be there on time for all of you. So today I have decided to pre-record. That way I can just have this tutorial pop up right at 6 o'clock when it is expected. So that is why we're not live today. But if you're missing the community atmosphere, or if you just want to show me what you've accomplished with my tutorial, you can always feel free to send me a message. I'm always interested in seeing what everybody has come up with, and I'm interested in seeing what everybody has made, what colors you chose, and what you decide to do with your feathers. You know, if you're putting them as part of a tapestry or something, or if you decide that you're going to just leave them by themselves and kind of stick them on a wall since they're so pretty, even without anything else added to them. I'm always interested in seeing those photos. And if you want to share with our community of crafters, the only place that people will let photos be shared on my Facebook page is actually in the reviews section. So if you leave me a review that you had a good time and, you know, your feedback and everything, I'm always interested in hearing that. But furthermore, I'm also always interested in seeing your photos, and it will let you attach them to your review so that other people on Facebook can see what you made. So there's a couple of workarounds if you're missing the community atmosphere. So my plan is to figure out a way to start going live on YouTube instead of Facebook Live, and then everything will still be published on Facebook. So the show will go on, never fear. Facebook's not going to take me down. So as you can see, this is our long skinny feather that we started with. And this is our different macrame feather. So you can see it's got a little bit of a different look to it. You can see each of the individual threads, and this is part of the draw of traditional macrame. Whereas this is really super fluffy. These are my favorite ones, truthfully, because look at the way they move. You know, if this is somewhere with like wind blowing. So what I was talking about tapestries, you know, you can see if this is hanging up, it's kind of not retaining its shape. So you are going to want to spray it with some hairspray, or you can put it on some sort of clear backing. There's a lot of iron-on options available at craft stores. And generally, the smaller you make these, the more they hold their shape on their own. The only difference is this piece is noticeably larger in the little tiny pieces. So picture me trimming it to be this size. You really notice that spine. So I tend to go with the bigger size and just embrace it. But picture a few of these kind of layered one next to each other and like a big branch or something hanging on your wall, and picture how pretty and very boho chic that would be. Especially this thread is like my favorite with a little bit of metallic. So there's a lot of mixing and matching that can be done. I'm actually going to continue to make more macrame feathers with these remaining two colors so that I can layer them and take a couple of photos and announce that this has been filmed for Facebook. So if you found this through the event, thank you very much for crafting along. I really appreciate it. The tip links for this event are open. They will remain open indefinitely. Those are the same tip links that we use for pretty much every class. Those are www.lindseycraftstudio.com/tips, or they are www.paypal.me/Lindsey's Craft Studio. And then your $5 donation gets directly to me, and I can continue to do things like this and offer free or reduced crafts for all. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for crafting with me. Make sure you give me a follow on Facebook if you're finding me through YouTube. And I'm also on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, and I will see you back on Facebook as well. Hopefully I will see you at another craft tutorial very, very soon. Bye guys, have a good day.